Hey everyone, it's Nicole here today for Pretty Pink Posh, and I am sharing some holiday cards created by creating mostly a one-layer card here with stamping with the new Elegant Holly and Decorative Ornaments stamped images on light gray cardstock and coloring in these with Polychromos. And I'm going to share a couple of tips and tricks with this technique. The outlines were stamped and embossed in white. However, when you use the Polychromos, it tends to kind of distort and color over part of that white embossing. So we're going to start with our MISTI, and we're going to start with the images we're going to use. I'm using the sentiment from the Decorative Ornaments stamp set for all three cards. We're just going to move the placement of that greeting around depending on what images we're using. And I'm going to start with the Elegant Holly images, kind of positioning those around my sentiment, figuring out the exact placement. We're going to play around with this. The first card is going to feature the sentiment kind of in the lower right corner of the card. You can see I'm playing and moving it around, but I end up with it in the bottom right corner pretty much. And we're going to build the background around that, meaning pretty much everything's going to be filled in. It's not going to be super close together, but it's going to be filled in. I'm going to use a powder tool all over this light gray Simon Says Stamp Fog cardstock. Then I'm going to ink up my stamps with a clear embossing ink. Press those into the cardstock and then sprinkle on my white embossing powder. Now it's super important at this point, after you have embossed your images, don't take your stamps out of your stamp positioner tool. This is a technique that's really going to require something like the MISTI or something similar, because you don't want to move your stamps. And that's because as I start coloring in my images with Polychromos, and I think this really goes for any colored pencil you might be using, some of the color will get on parts of the white embossing, and it's just really next to impossible to get off. I don't want to go around and try to get rid of it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to color this in, put this panel back in our MISTI, and stamp it again once the coloring is done. But let's get to the coloring, because that's where the magic happens here. This creates such beautiful, elegant results, and you could even use a darker cardstock than the light one I'm using here and still be able to see the beautiful colors of these Polychromos. They are just phenomenal in adding color to dark cardstock and really making the images shine, I guess. I love that about this. So just coloring these in. I start with my light, pretty much like Copic markers, and then I kind of shade in with my darker. Now, the berries is somewhere where you can really see that you're going to need to stamp it again. There's a little highlight on each of these, so a little area that was stamped and embossed in white that gets completely covered up when you color in with the red markers. So definitely going to need to stamp over that to reincorporate that part of the element back into the design, because I really think it adds to the overall look and feel of this beautiful image. Laying down our color, we're going to blend this all beautifully. And as you add more color to all of these images, it just really makes this shine. One thing, and the reason I chose to do this card first rather than one of the more simple ones, is that there's a lot of moving around. Because we're filling in the background with images, I stamped as many as I could with one press of my MISTI, and then I colored them in because I can't remove them until I have stamped these images again. So we're going to have to do this a few times. I think I did it 3 or 4 times to get everything, which seems like a lot, but these cards came together really, really fast. Now, I'm not going to share the coloring of every single image in all 3 cards because I literally used these 5 colors for all 3 cards. Even the card that uses the decorative ornaments instead of the elegant holly. The only thing I did different was I added in some white in the ornament card for the base of the ornament, and we'll talk a little bit about that when I get to that card in the video. But it's just coloring in these images over and over. So I went ahead and left a little bit of the coloring in, but going forward, I'm going to kind of skip through that and just share more of the process of stamping these once they've been colored and then putting the final card together. Look how pretty that holly pops off of the gray cardstock. I just think it's a very fun, beautiful technique. And every time I use my Polychromos, I think, why do I not use them more? So I really need to encourage myself to use my Polychromos or Prismacolors more often. Polychromos tend to not leave that waxy film that Prismacolors do, which is one of the reasons I have really loved using these. And I also think they give fantastic results on darker cardstock. So but every time I think, oh, I should use these more. Okay, let's put our paper back in the MISTI. Let's ink up our stamps again because remember we haven't moved them, so it's going to be easy to line them up perfectly. Go ahead and stamp that again. Take our white embossing powder, sprinkle that on, and heat emboss. Now this is where the magic happens. So anywhere that white line wasn't very great, those little highlights on the berries, you can see them now. We are going to re-emboss, and it just makes a world of difference in the finished design because it really adds that outline detail to those images, anything that might have got colored. So I've cleaned off the original stamps I used, and now I'm going to do my next stamp, my next phase of this, the next step, I guess. So we've filled in a little bit more area. We're going to emboss. We're going to color. The coloring is going to be exactly like before. As I mentioned, I am not going to keep that in the video just to save a little time. Now we're on our third step, and I'm playing around with the stamps trying to figure out the best placement. I kind of wish I hadn't stamped in that upper left corner. It's always best to work from one area and then kind of up and out or down and out, whichever that might be, to get your placement exactly right. But where I started around the sentiment and kind of tried to stamp out from there, I feel like I kind of limited myself in this one little area of my card, and I had the worst time figuring out my placement for the stamps. I ended up being really happy with the finished results, but it was a little bit tricky just trying to get that filled in. So a little tip, and I've shared it before when I've done all over backgrounds like this, and I just didn't follow my own advice, and that is to work, in this case, it would have been up and out, and that way I would have left myself enough room. I still could have used that image, but I maybe would have just moved the position a little bit. So here we're going to stamp the next layer. We'll emboss, we'll color, we'll stamp and emboss again. And this is really going to kind of finish off the stamping and coloring for this particular card. Something I want to mention, because I did leave a little coloring in here, I just sharpened my pencil. I'm just going to sharpen another one. Something that I think is super important is to have a pencil sharpener right there while you are coloring with colored pencils or Polychromos. The sharper your pencil, the better your results, I think. And I always keep my pencil sharpener right there while I'm working on a project because I'm able to sharpen those right away. So there I finished my last stamping. I'm adding the embossing powder. We're going to heat set that, and that is going to finish off. That'll finish off our card. And I missed one of the leaves. I forgot I added an additional leaf up there in the upper corner. Okay, so I have finished my coloring. We can take our panel then and do all of the fun finishing details. So I'm going to just kind of clean up my stamps real quick, get those put away, and then we are going to attach this card base, which I should have mentioned earlier and I forgot, is a 4" by 5 1/4" panel. And we're going to attach that, and I think I did end up stamping another little portion of a couple of images. I felt like it needed it. We're going to attach this panel to a white top fold card base. And then we're going to add our finishing details, which in this case is going to be crystal glaze to the berries, and then some of the holiday jewels from the Pretty Pink Posh November release. We're going to scatter those throughout the card, and they're going to add a beautiful bit of sparkle. The crystal glaze on the berries is like glossy accents. It's going to dry completely clear. It's going to give those berries a glossy raised finish and finish off the design really beautifully. So while it looks a little milky right now, this is going to dry completely clear and it will be perfect for finishing off our card. I like to adhere my adhesive, which I usually use a nice strong adhesive. We did a lot of stamping and embossing, so I like to use plenty of adhesive to help hold this panel nice and flat to our card base. And because it's slightly smaller than A2 sized, it's going to have a nice white border all the way around. And then I'm going to add gemstones scattered throughout, and I'm attaching these with Ranger Multi-Matte Medium. And I stuck to green and white for this card. In fact, I think both cards with Elegant Holly, I only used green and white. And then on the card with the ornaments, I went ahead and used the red as well. So it's just kind of a personal preference, but they are just the perfect little accents. They add such a nice touch of color and sparkle and added interest all over what is basically a one-layer design. I'm using a jewel picker to pick these up and place them where they go, which really helps, unless they flip and fall over. That way I don't have to use my fingers to attach those to my card. And that you don't get your fingers into the glue and you get perfect placement every time. So looking for just the perfect little jewels here. I tend to gravitate towards the teeny tiny ones for the most part. I love those. And these are just the perfect traditional holiday colors. So beautiful. I think I'm going to add a couple more maybe. And the first card featuring Polychromos on light gray cardstock is all finished. Now the second design is a little bit more simple, and that means I'm simply going to use one image from the Elegant Holly stamp set with the the sentiment from Decorative Ornaments kind of in the upper 2/3 of the card. And because I have stamped this just one image, it's going to be a lot less work. There's not going to be coming back and forth and back and forth. I left the first one in just to show you what it would be if you wanted to fill in an entire panel. This is even quicker and easier because we have stamped one image. It's a bigger image. We stamped our greeting. We're going to emboss this. We're going to color it in. We're going to come back and stamp and emboss again. Remember, you want to leave your images in the machine or in the MISTI, pardon me. And then I went ahead and came back, added jewels all over around that. And then I did come back to the first card and I decided to take some Nuvo crystal drops in gloss white and add little drops along the stems of my holly berry, or along the greenery here, and it just adds a fun little decorative element to each. So these are teeny tiny little white drops along the leaves. And I'm going to do that for the second card as well. We will attach this panel to a white top fold card base. And both of my cards featuring the elegant holly will be finished. So for my third example, I stamped and colored the ornaments from the Decorative Ornaments stamp set. I added the sentiment. I'm taking a straight line ruler now and a white pen and drawing lines. I didn't draw through my sentiment. I drew right up to it and then up above. And that's going to give that illusion of hanging ornaments. The background of these ornaments was colored in with a white pencil. So the white Polychromo pencil kind of helps distinguish the ornament from the rest of the background, I think, in this case. And then I added Nuvo crystal drops in silver moondust to the top of the ornament. And then all over the rest of the ornament, we're going to apply Nuvo crystal drops in white blizzard so that they're sparkly. So don't be afraid to go all over the ornament if you want to. You could leave them as is, or you could add some additional embellishment, whether it's glossy accents or crystal glaze, or in this case, a sparkly type of material. But I love that this gives it a raised, sparkly finish, very much like a lot of ornaments. And then you want to let this dry completely. And because it's quite a bit of the Nuvo crystal drop product, it is going to take a little bit to dry. So I would let it probably sit and dry for at least a couple hours before you kind of come back and do any finishing things. In this case, I want to add some little ribbon to the top of the ornaments and then add that scattering of the holiday rhinestone jewels, just like I did for the other two cards. This one just is the same exact technique where we stamped and embossed the ornaments, colored them in, and then added another layer of embossing on top of that. So I've just got some really thin embroidery floss. I think I used about 2 strands per bow for an ornament, tied it into a little bow, added a drop of glossy accents to the top, and then glued that in place. And I even added a little drop over the top of that to hold it down. So we're just going to tie this into a little bow, snip the ends, and then pop that in place right at the top of the ornament. And that is going to finish off our holiday cards featuring pretty pink Posh decorative ornaments and elegant holly with Polychromos on light gray cardstock. Thank you guys so much for joining me today for these Christmas cards featuring Polychromos. The supplies I used are listed and linked below the video here on YouTube. Here are a couple more videos that you might be interested in. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you so much for joining me today, and we'll see you next time.